So good morning. Today we're gonna talk about getting tiling textures or images that'll seam together correctly. The purpose of which is to learn obviously how to seam images, but also to practice with the clone stamp tool and give you a few more little skill sets in Photoshop before we move on. Kind of scary. Today would be a third of the way through the semester. How did that happen, right? I have grade printouts so that you can get where you are right now, what exercises you've completed, what you might have forgot to post, or what have you. Also, your assignment ones are graded. It takes a little bit of getting used to read the grade sheets that I print out. Every one of you will get something like this, and I will hold it from far away so you can't see who's on it. But basically, across the top there is stuff about exercises, which ones you've completed. On every one of these graphs, there's a class average above, and then below is your name with your score. It gives you a comparison on how people did. People seem to like that. Below that, you have assignments. Right now, there's a bunch of zeros in the whole assignment section because obviously you haven't done the assignments yet. That's normal. The grade, however, is accurate. At the end of the assignment section, there's a total comment count, how many comments you've done so far. I used to not do this, but I think it's useful for people to have an idea of how many comments they've made and that sort of thing. There's a percentage assigned next to it. It's not an absolute science. I think, basically at the end of the semester, I kind of adjust it and curve it such that, we take class average about how many comments people make. Anyway, but it gives you some idea of where you are versus how many comments I think you should have made, if that makes sense. But again, nothing is fixed. It's not a finished grade. You make more comments. That changes. Does that make sense? Okay. There's a big bar here. In that big bar, it will tell you what the average grade for the class is and what your grade is. Remember, the averages are always on top. Your grade's always below. The big chart here at the bottom, down here, will give you your grade on your assignment and then my comments. I always try to write a couple sentences about why I think you got what you got and to help guide you if you wanted to do a resubmit. So it should be relatively straightforward. If you struggle with reading it, let me know and we'll go through it. Every time you do an assignment, you get a new one of these. So when I hand back grades each time, you get an update so that you have an idea of kind of where you stand and that sort of thing. So we'll do that a little bit later. Today's exercise is by no means going to take the whole day, and I think that's a really good thing because it gives you the rest of the day to polish up your assignment 102s. Make sure that they look the way you want. If you're struggling with something, I can sit with you and we can work through it and make sure it looks how you want it to look. So that's the plan for today. Shockingly, we move software packages. We move into InDesign on Wednesday. So I know it happens fast, but at the same time, we're going to come back to Photoshop. So it's not the end of Photoshop by any means. But we have to keep kind of chugging through things so that you get more experience and more exposure. It should be relatively self-explanatory when we move. You've already learned a lot of the basic Adobe stuff. So today, we're going to work on tiling textures, and there's a variety of steps involved in this, some of which might not seem as relevant as they are down the road. Until you really start using the texture. But we'll start with the basics, and I'll explain how some of the other stuff works. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to find something that's worth tiling in the first place. And by tiling texture, I just mean something that can be repeated seamlessly. So if I had an image let's say I have an image that's like this, and on that image it has some kind of a pattern on it. Okay? The idea behind the tiling texture is that I can put this image here, and I can take the same image and place it up on top here, and it will continue to make the same pattern. Does that make sense? Likewise, I can take the same image and move it over to here, and it will continue the same pattern. I can move the same image to right here, and it will continue the same pattern. So we can end up with a large grid made up of these smaller grids. Does that kind of make sense for how it comes together? So we're going to make those today out of photographs. And it takes a little bit of practice to learn how to do it, but at the same time, it's incredibly valuable once you figure it out. On the course website, there are already a bunch of these that exist. And I'll show you where they are, just like we've been kind of seeing that there's collage images. If you come down to tiling textures, it's the same thing, where there's a bunch of tiling textures by popularity. You can see which ones have been used. There's landscape ones. And so the idea behind any one of these is that they're seamless such that you could glue them together in an infinite direction in either way. And so you can see what people have done in the past, and you're of course welcome to do anything like that down the road. So I went ahead and started with a Creative Commons image search to get a base image. You may have shot some texture images when we did exercise 104, in which case you can use your own images. What I did was I went to search.creativecommons.org, right here, and you want to type in something that you're looking for. So maybe you're looking for fabric. Sometimes if you put texture after it, you can get good results. And so we can kind of look through here, and these are images that people have shot. They're not perfect. You can see that this one's been used before. You know, jeans. There's a variety of different things. Depending on what you're interested in, you can use any one of these. Ideally, we're looking for kind of a straight-on shot. So maybe something like this would be good. You don't want something that's in perspective or something that has a lot of shadows. So something like this isn't going to work because when you tile it, it's going to look like it has a very repetitive pattern to it. So you want something that's kind of generic, and you could pick any one of these. I went ahead and I did some examples here of things that I might have used, and I'm going to do a couple of these just so that you see how I go about doing it. Bricks, siding, those kinds of things tend to be really easy to get your head around. So I would encourage you to start with something like that. I like this one, so I'm going to end up doing it because I like that red. Anyway, but this one's probably the easiest one to start with. And so just like we've seen before here, I can look and I can see this image. There's a little icon for download, which is right here. I want the largest one I can, so luckily it's nice and big. So I'll download this image. I want to show it so that I can copy it. There it is. Let me copy it, and I want to put it on my flash drive. So let me go to my flash drive. This is 135, and this is exercise 110. All right, and I'll go ahead and paste this. And since I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and kind of like this brick. Maybe I use this brick. Show in folder so I can copy this one. Perfect. Copy, and we'll drop it into my flash drive. Right here. And I said I really like this one, so I'm going to download this one too. Okay, so I have all three of those images. Those are what I'm going to use in Photoshop. So let me go ahead and open the first image. And like I said, I'm going to start with that siding because it's pretty generic and pretty easy to kind of wrap your head around. I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Open. And I need to go to Exercise 110. Now, I don't remember which one was which, so let me see it as icons, and then I can pick this one. All right. So there it is. So if I'm looking at this image, there's a couple problems with making this a tiling texture. And actually, let me just really quickly, as a demonstration, make my canvas a little bit bigger so you can see what would happen. Hold on, let me back up 1 second. Make this an editable layer. There we go. Now let me go ahead and adjust my canvas. You don't have to do this. I'm just showing you this as an example so you can wrap your head around this a little bit better. Okay, so let's say I had this particular image. If I copy this image and paste this image, and then tried to line them up, we'd see that they don't look particularly seamless. True? Right? And part of the problem here is that I have perspective lines. The camera was not shot exactly perpendicular to the wall, so I end up with these lines that are sloping up, relatively centered, and sloping down. And I have to deal with those. So let me go ahead and get rid of these layers. And let me zoom in on this particular image for a second. Okay, so what I'm going to do in order to adjust this is I'm going to use something called a skew. And it's under Edit, it's under Transform, and I can pick a couple different ones. Warp works if it's a curving surface. I think skew is the easiest to wrap your head around in the beginning. So once again, that's Edit, Transform, and then Skew. And what I'm going to do is I have control points on each side, and if I drag the control points, you can see that I can skew the image, right? So it's getting straight. From where it was pinched, we're going to go up to approximately where it's straight. Like that. Likewise, I'm going to grab this lower corner of the image, and I'm going to skew this down until that starts to be straight. And it takes some back and forth to double check. Okay? If I want to make sure that they're really turning out perfectly straight, I can go to the View menu and I can view rulers, which will give me little rulers across the top, which in Photoshop is not that critical. When we get to InDesign, you're going to have the rulers on all the time. But I can drag what's called a guide from my ruler down across my space here, and I can kind of line it up on one side. See how, can you see that? Yeah, you guys can see that actually better than I can on the screen. I have a little guide there which will help me as I start to adjust. Okay, that's perfectly straight right now. If I push a guide down here at the bottom, we're not quite there yet, so let me adjust this down a little bit more. And as I said, it's a little combination because each time you skew it, it stretches the bottom and stretches the top. And what I'll end up with is something that is a lot closer to this tiling texture. Okay? So if right now, for example, let me go ahead and apply, I were to take this and I were to put two of them in, right? That's starting to get a lot closer. Let me control mine. Right? It still doesn't quite match perfectly, but we've got a general. I can hide these guys now. Show. I just turned off the guys. Okay, in general, this is getting a lot closer to being a seamless piece. If I were to paste another one on here and go like this, we can see that they're starting to get there. There's still a little bit of shadow that's happening from one side to the other, and that's something that I'm going to have to deal with as well. So let me back up here. All right. So the next piece is I need to crop this in such a way that we're going to start to, what's the best way to envision this? Okay, so what I'm going to do, okay, so right now this is my image. Okay? What I ultimately am going to do is I'm going to use a filter that will offset the images. And what that's going to do is it's going to cut the image right there, and it's going to cut the image right there. So it's going to divide it into 4 pieces. Then it's going to take this piece and move it down over to here. Right? And then it's going to take this piece and move it back up over there. Okay, so it's going to flip these 2 pieces such that they'll start to touch. Watch me do it, and then we'll see if it makes a little bit more sense. Okay, the only problem is I need to crop this image down because I don't want these diagonals left. So I'm going to use the crop tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle around my image, something like this. And I want to be relatively consistent about where this crop happens. So we'll start it there. Actually, we can go up almost to there. Should be about the right length. Okay? And I'll go ahead, make it a little bit smaller. A little bit smaller. There. Okay. Okay, so now it's cropped. Now I'm going to use what's called the filter offset, under other and then offset. And this is where I can choose, right, both in horizontal and vertical. It would be helpful if I knew how many pixels wide this image is. So let me take a quick look at the image size just so I can see. Okay, so its width is about 4,500 pixels. Its height is about 3,000 pixels. Close enough, ballpark. So if I go back to that filter offset, other offset. By the way, this is written out Photoshop 1.22. So if you get lost. Okay, so horizontal, I want this, my value is 4,500. I want half of 4,500, which would be 2,250. And you see that when I did that, right, and I typed that value in, it cut the image in half, and it took the one half and stuck it on this side, basically flipped the two halves. Does that make sense? Right? So if I go back to 0 for a second, we can see there it is, right? The shadowing goes from a little bit dark here, lighter in the middle, dark there. When I go 2250, we go from light on each side to a dark in the center. Okay, the advantage of this is I just created a tiling scene, right? So this side of this image exactly matches this side of this image. So if I were to say OK, and let me go to image, I'm doing this as an example. And I were to paste two of these, this image will match up perfectly there. See how the seam goes away when I put them together? That's what that offset does. So, and now you can see that this basically forms the full image. Okay? So let's back up to where I'm right here. Now I'm going to do that same offset, and I can actually do these at the same time. I was doing them broken. Hold on a second. Filter, other, offset. I was doing them as two steps because I wanted to show you what happens. But we're going to divide the horizontal and the vertical. Right? So the vertical was 3,000, so it's about 1,500. It's not a precise science for how you do this, but you want to pay a little bit of attention to it being ballpark about half the size of your image. You can just use the sliders, and if you just use the sliders, you can see that it adjusts where the seam happens. The seam is right here. I don't know whether you can see it. You see that horizontal seam? Right? As I adjust the slider, that horizontal seam changes its location. Right? It's moving down. See how it's moving down? I like to do it about halfway, which is why I look up the values so that I know approximately there's the center, and that's where I'm working with. So I'll go ahead and say, okay, so on yours, it would probably have a horizontal value and a vertical value. I just did it in 2 steps instead of 1. So I'll go ahead and say, okay. And now if we look at this image carefully, Control 0 so we can see everything, we've got a few issues. This seam here is almost non-existent. That one's going to be an easy one to get rid of. But we've got some issues with this horizontal seam there. So what I need to do is I need to be able to blend those two together. And I'm going to use something called the clone stamp tool to do that. And it's over here on the left side. It looks like kind of a rubber stamp. And the idea behind a clone stamp is exactly like using those rubber stamps. You guys remember when you were in like middle school or whatever, and you had the little stamps and you had a stamp pad, or maybe it was elementary school, right? And you took the ink, put it on the page. Clone stamp does the same thing, only the ink is something else in your Photoshop image. And so it just copies the pixels from one area onto another area. So I'm going to use this clone stamp tool right here. It works the same as the other tools you've been used to. There's a brush size, so I can adjust the brush size. It has 2 factors. One is the size, and the second is what's called the hardness. And the hardness is it going to make an exact circular copy of one piece, or is it going to fuzz the edges? So I'm going to show you at 100% hardness and rather large right now so that you can see how this copy works. Okay. Now in order to make the copy, I hold down Alt and it's going to say where do you want to sample from. So I'm going to sample from here. Now if I were to make that copy up here, you can see that it previews the copy for me. Right? And so no matter where I move, it's going to copy from that point that I sampled from, which is right here. So if I were to make this point, see how it copied the pixels from here, put them over here. Okay? If instead of that, I had a very diffuse brush, so a soft brush, right? Instead of making this hard line, I'd end up, right, with a very soft, you can almost not see it. There it is. It's a very soft edge. See how it kind of blends in a little bit more? It's not quite as sharp. So let me back up. If I'm going to make this stuff go away, right, I like the soft brush. That usually helps a little bit, but it depends on what you're trying to copy. And I'm going to zoom in. Right, and so now you can see that transition very well. And I'm going to hold down Alt close by, something like that. And I'm going to blend this right over the top of that scene. Now when I get up here, it gets a little trickier. So let me hold down Alt, and we're going to try to bridge that a little bit like that. We'll hold down Alt and we'll sample from here. The nice thing is in this version of Photoshop we get previews of the pixels we're copying, so we can kind of help align this. Right, and so we're going to go up. Right, now here's a good example. Okay, see how I get two spots? I had a spot. Right, let me switch to just the cursor. I have this spot. When I copied, it copied the same spot again. Right, that can create patterns on your image that are less than desirable. So when I come and I see something like that happening, I'll actually go to Alt and I'll sample from the other side to try to get that to go away. And so it's a blend of the two sides. So we'll try to blend that a little bit. Obviously, because this has these wood grain textures, I'm going to do my best to try to blend those wood grains together so that they come across. Sometimes you might need to pull them through a little bit further. Right, something like that. We get once again to the seam. This one's going to be a little bit harder as a seam because they're not as accurate as I would have liked. I'm going to hold down Alt and try to sample from here. And I'm going to slowly build my shadow up as I get a little bit closer. I might have to keep working at it a little bit. Not bad. A little bit of a fuzz there, but it'll work. Let me hold down Alt, and we'll copy that over a little bit. And then we'll go back down the other direction. So that's seaming up pretty well. All right, we need to work through this section here a little bit more. Okay, so there was an example where I shifted the edge over and they didn't really blend together well enough, so we need to work on that a little bit more. Usually it's a lot of little clicks with constantly changing where the sampling points are from based on what your image looks like. Something like that. Okay, now we're back down to one of these side pieces, so we'll slowly try to shift this down a little bit. And this stuff certainly takes practice to get it to look exactly as you want, but you can see that relatively easily I can start to copy that. Let's go through this section. I like to do it about this level of zoom because I can really see what's happening with the pixels and how they're kind of blending together. You want to be careful when you get right to the edges, not to do too much clone stamping on the edges. And now let me go across that horizontal seam, which is right here. So we're just going to work through it. That one was not a particularly challenging seam to begin with. Okay, now if we go to Control 0 and we look at these, it's pretty darn good. Alright, there's a little bit of an issue because you can still see the little jumps in there, but that was my original. I could go back and fix that a little bit. But now that this is done, if I press Control 0, let me actually zoom out a little bit. If I go to my canvas size, this is again just an illustration so that you can see it. If I take this image and I copy it and paste it. If I go up, the two will tile. If I go down, the two will tile. If I go to this side, they'll tile. If I go to this side, they'll tile. And if we go diagonally, they'll still fit together. So let me zoom out a little bit more. So even though we do have that shadowing band, you can see that these are in fact tiling together. Okay? In reality, I'm not that happy with the shadowing band. I think if I were doing this again, I might crop it a little bit closer to the center so we don't have quite so strong of a dark and light banding, because obviously the bigger this gets, the more you're going to see those stripes. Okay? So there's the first one running through. Let me go ahead and open another one. I really want to do my barn, so I'm going to do my barn. Okay? And so this one's going to be a little bit challenging because of the peeling paint and what have you. I can do a horizontal stretch or I can do a vertical stretch depending on which piece of this I want. So let me go ahead and zoom in here a little bit so we can see. It's not the best image quality. Once you zoom in. Yeah, I'm not that happy with it. Never mind, I'm not going to do that one. So look at the brick. Yeah, this one's not good. Okay, so this one's pretty good because I can get a pretty good stretch vertically of this brick. And brick can be really challenging, and that's why I want to show you this part of the brick. So, first thing that we need to do is we need to skew this image so that we get it. But I can also kind of give it a general crop. Well, no, we'll skew it first. So let me go to Edit, and then we're going to go to Transform. Oh, it's locked because it's on the background layer. Let me right-click and say Layer from Background. Okay, and then let me go to Edit, Transform, and Skew. Yes. And so I'm going to start dragging these until I get roughly vertical. This one might have to come back that way a little bit. Okay, I can use those guides again. So remember, just click and drag, and it will help you set up these guides. Oh, I had view guides turned off. Hold on. Show guides. There we go. And so I can use these to help line up this image. Probably wouldn't hurt to have a horizontal guide in here so we can make sure that the bricks are actually running a relatively horizontal course, which they are. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with how that turned out, so I'll go ahead and say okay. Now I'm going to work on the cropping a little bit. And so this cropping starts to be challenging because we've got a pattern that's repeating and we have to pay attention to how we make the crops. So, one, I have to get small enough so that I'm inside this vertical space. Alright, so we know we're going to get rid of that. Okay, so I want to look carefully at these bricks. And we'll start with this upper corner. Okay, so I've got a small brick here. Let's start a quarter of the way on the small brick, right in the middle of that small brick. Now, as I come down, I'm going to be looking for a similarly positioned small brick at the bottom of the page. Okay, so I don't want to end on a large brick, I want to end on a small brick. So there's a small brick, that's what I want to end on, about halfway through. Now if we come up, let me look. Okay, I've got a small brick here and then a large brick there. So let me come back down. And in an ideal sense, I wouldn't pick this brick, I'd pick that brick because I'm going from a small brick to a large brick. So you see how I'm kind of mentally going through and seeing how this pattern works at the top? So, small, large, right? I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. So we've got a small and then a large. This row is all small. We'll confirm that down here, that row is all small. That's good. We adjust this a little bit. looking pretty good. Look, alright, I like this. I'm going to move this over slightly so that that falls right in that white grout line to make the seam a little bit easier to make. It needs to go up a little bit more. Alright, so I've got that roughly the way I want it. Not quite skewed the way I want. This is going down a little bit, so I may have to make a few adjustments. I may actually end up dragging this up to another row of bricks a little bit closer so that they fit a little bit better. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. Now if I press Control 0, we can see that I've got my overall texture here. I'm going to do the same thing with my offset tools. I want to have a general idea of the size, so I'm going to go to Image, Image Size, and this one's 1400 by 1700 pixels. So when I do the offset, I go to Filter, Other, Offset. We had a horizontal of 1500, so that would be 750, and we have a vertical of, what was it, 1700, so it's, I don't know, 850, something like that. Okay, and so we see that I have a seam there, and I have a seam there. Because I didn't spend too much time getting my alignment correct, we end up with some lines that are, some grout lines that are very off. Right? Likewise, these aren't that off. This is pretty close over in here. So we're doing an okay job there. Right? That works out pretty well as we go down. That works out pretty well. But the further we go, the more off we get. So in reality, this one's worth going back 2 steps, maybe even further. And readjusting this skewing, and so I might actually drop my guides in closer to where I wanted my corners to be. And then I can, when I do my skews, I can be looking at this spot. So let me go back to Image, Edit, Transform, Skew. And I can tweak this a little bit to get that exactly in the center of this, and at the same time getting that exactly in the center of this piece. Like that. I'll do the same thing on the opposite side. So we'll come over here, making sure that I am matching up. So we'll pick, let's pick this one, that one's not bad. And adjust that ever so slightly. And I'll come down to this corner. See how off this corner is? This should be down in the center of that brick. So we can skew it this way. And so it takes a combination. You have to keep kind of working at it until you really get these dialed in. There. Off there, keep adjusting. So because this already has a pattern to it, it's a little bit more challenging than say that wood one, which is a little bit easier to seam together. Okay, so I now have it set up the way I want. When I do the crop, I already have the transformation. I already have my little guides here set up, so it's a pretty easy cropping there. And now let's try that offset again. And it's much better if we look at that seam. Right, the grout lines are much closer. The horizontal seam is right there. So again, a lot closer. So now it's a matter of going in with the clone stamp and working through these little changes. So once again, I'll use clone stamp here. My brush is definitely too big for this image, so I'm just using the bracket key to make this a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to copy certain parts of my image over, right, adjusting it like this, seaming it like that. And I'm going to do as best I can on kind of a brick-by-brick basis. And it's going to take a little bit of work to blend because the colors of these bricks are slightly off. I can copy the grout line as necessary as well. Let's cover a little bit more of that up. There we go. And again, this one's going to be a little bit harder because the grout line's off. However, we can copy the grout line down, and then we can fill in the rest of this brick. Like that. And so you can see that I can actually recreate a lot of this brick, adjusting the grout line, etc. So this one's going to take a little bit more. This grout line here is going to be a little bit long, so maybe I'll copy some grout line from over here. Let me make this a little bit smaller. Copy this. Here. Anyway, you get the idea. So this one, because of its size, is going to take me a little while to do. I'm not going to force you to watch me go through and fix every one of these bricks. The smaller the texture, the easier it is to put together. So I ask you to do these tiling textures. I don't say how many. I'd like 2. If you want to do more, you can do more. There are another couple things that I'm going to point out, and these things are optional. You don't have to do them, but I at least want to illustrate what they do and why they're important. If I had something that had some transparency to it, it would be helpful to identify the transparency. So let me go back to my Flickr search here, and let me look for like a mesh or something. Chain link, people try to do chain link frequently. It's very hard to do to get it to seam correctly. I'll just warn you ahead of time. Don't like these. Let's try screen. Okay, we'll pick something generic like this. It's fine. Okay, so let me go ahead and download this. Again, it's original size. Show in folder. Copy this. And let me go to file and then open. Okay, so I'm going to breeze through the seaming part of this. So I'm just going to crop it. It's shot pretty straight on, so I'm not overly worried about it. Let me go ahead and crop. I'm going to pick from the center of one of these to the center of another one, and we'll come down here to the center. It looks like they're off slightly, so I really do have to do some adjustments. So I'm going to pull these guides once again. Alright, let me do skew, edit, layer from background. Then I'll go to edit, transform, and skew. Adjust that. And again, my goal being center, center. Each of those 2 points. Okay, that side looks pretty good. Alright, so that's pretty good. Now I can do the crop. And we go from there to there. I'm going to go ahead and crop. Let me go quickly to my filter, other, and then offset. I should have looked at how big the image was. The reason I like this image size, 3000 by 2000, image size, yeah, filter, other, offset. Oops, that's definitely too big. 1500. Okay. So this one's actually seaming very well because I did the work in the crop, such that I'm not going to spend time clone stamping for right now. Now that this is done, however, it would be very helpful to be able to make this transparent on demand. And so I'll save this. I'm going to go to File, Save for Web. Just as its image. And I'll save it. And we'll call this yellow mesh. And I call it diffuse. And the reason that I'm going to use these extensions when I say underscore diffuse is because it's something that will be useful down the road. Like, let's say you take the 136 class and you start doing V-Ray materials. Knowing what diffuse is versus what is transparency versus what is bump can help these things combine together. I'm going to show you an example just so that hopefully I'll encourage you to take 136. Anyway, so yellow mesh diffuse, and I'll go ahead and say save. Okay, and so that's saved nicely, I hope. Come on, Photoshop. There we go. Okay, so now what I want is I want to isolate all of these little holes. And so let me go ahead, and I'm just going to use the magic wand because I think, I'm going to use the magic wand, which is hidden under the quick selection tool, because I think it'll probably be very fast at selecting these regions. I'm going to hold down Shift so I can select each of these really easily. Bear with me, I can only click so fast. Okay, so I have this. And so what we've previously done is we've come over here and selected the quick mask. Oops, that was backwards. Let me do select inverse. And we've come down here and selected add layer mask, and it makes that part transparent. Okay? This is a pretty good first step in doing something like this. But it doesn't solve all the problems down the road. So we could save this as a PNG and see this transparency. However, a program like Rhino or a lot of the other programs aren't going to recognize this mask on the Photoshop file. So what we want to do is we want to create this same mask just on another layer. Basically a black and white set of images. So I'm going to step backwards for just a second. With this selected, I'm going to create a new layer right here. And I'll use my paintbrush, and I'm going to use black and white as my two colors. Start with black. And let me make my brush bigger, right, so that I can actually paint. Actually, we can make it a lot bigger than that. Maybe not quite that big. So I'm happy medium. Okay? And then I'm going to paint so that this turns out black. Actually, this should be white. Hold on. But we'll do white. Is that gray or is it white? You probably can't tell. It's gray. That's better. We're going to paint that in white. And again, this is on its own new layer. Let me do select, inverse, paint this in black. And so basically, I'm creating the same thing as the mask, right? And we're going to save that separately. The good news about something like this is if we create it and we want to use this in Photoshop down the road, we can just copy and paste it onto the mask. So anyway, so I have this created. I'm going to go to File, Save for Web. And we'll go ahead and click Save. And I'm going to call this Transparency. So there's the yellow mesh diffuse. We'll add underscore transparency. And I'll go ahead and click Save. Okay, so that's saved. If I want to give a little bit of texture to this, and this is a hard one to explain without doing a rendering example, I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to go to what's called a Gaussian blur, and we want to bump this pixel radius up, maybe a little bit higher, like that. Okay, see how it kind of blurs it a little bit? I'm going to save this one as well. And I'll save this one as a bump. And then I'm going to jump over to Rhino just so you can see what this stuff does. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you kind of these things and then what they can ultimately become. So I know you guys don't know anything about Rhino, but I at least wanted to explain how your Photoshop work can flow into something like Rhino. So this is Rhino. I'm going to do a quick rendering in V-Ray of this object, but I'm going to use those images that I just created in Photoshop to make the material. So let me go to my materials, and I'm explaining this even though you're not necessarily going to get there. And I'm going to load under diffuse. Remember, I used the term diffuse, that image. And that was under, hold on a second, here, 5, 110. Yellow mesh, diffuse. I say okay, okay. And so if I were to preview my material, the yellow mesh shows up, okay? But it's solid, so I need my transparency to show through. So I'm going to load up the transparency. Okay, and I may have done it backwards, which is always the case. Let's see. Yep, it's backwards. So the great thing about Rhino is you can just invert it right here. Now it's transparent. I'd also like to add that bump, and so I'll put that one down here. Bump. Okay. Just adds a little bit of extra realism to this. And then I'll go ahead and apply it to the object, and then let me render it. And the reason that I wanted to show you this is because I wanted you to at least see what Photoshop can give you down the road in another program. So learning these kinds of techniques is still very, very valuable. And so we'll let it finish up its work. But basically that mesh that I just took from a photograph, I made into an actual mesh that I can model with now inside of a program like Rhino. Okay? So I just kind of want to show you why I go through those extra steps. For what you're doing today, the only thing I really care about is the tiling texture. Right? If you want to mess around with something like a bump map, certainly those of you that have been in 136 before understand the value of creating a few of these. If you want to play around with it, see how it turns out, by all means, you're welcome to as well. So I will stop talking. I'm sorry that it took me that long to explain everything. I will turn you loose so that you can create your own. I encourage you to do that. And then, again, this shouldn't take you all day, so if you have questions or you want to talk about assignment 102, today's a good day to kind of finish that up. Remember, it's due before class on Wednesday, so it should be turned in, I would say post it the night before so you're not panicking. I'm not asking you for a digital print or an actual physical print, it's just submitting it. And I think that's it. Are there any questions about that? No? Okay, good. I'll turn you loose.